You know, Netanyahu keeps saying, and Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, that all the options are on the table. Are they really? When they speak about all the options, it's two options: to attack Iran or not to attack Iran. Actually, whether Israel will do it or the United States. Are there any other options? I believe there are. For instance, nobody has mentioned, or correct me if I'm wrong, in the last 2.5 days, the Arab Peace Initiative.
And even if a deal was signed today between the Israelis and the Palestinians, I think this deal will not last for long, given the lack of credibility, given the grave asymmetry of power between the parties, and given the non-democratic nature of both.
What can Canada do, and what should Canada do? First, we need to get on the right side of history. We need to engage with our Arab friends, rather than sit nervously on the sidelines and worry about what might be coming. This is the time of great need, and we will be remembered either for what we did to help or the fact that we didn't do anything to help.
Thank you very much. And to save you and your colleague from giving me signal of the time, I decided to do it on my own alarm clock, and I will try to finish before the 20 minutes. So now it is 42 past in my own 40 past. So let's say it is in, let me put it that way.
You wasted 1 minute.
No, I will not count this 1 minute. I will start on. Let's see whether it will work. The subject that we are going to talk about this evening is the continuation of the other subjects that we dealt with in the previous sessions. The only difference is that I understand that I am the only person who has the political background, so I will not compete with the brilliant speakers who took the floor before me and who will take the floor after me. And I will try to expand in the political field and try to give the picture how the things are seen when you are a politician. Because in the Arab Spring countries, the laws may be changed and democracy may be introduced, but those who are going to implement these reforms and this transition, who are going to manage the transition, are the politicians after all. And when you look at the question from the angle of a politician, it looks different. When there are pious Muslims, even if you, as a candidate to become member of parliament, you are not that pious Muslim, in order to attract their vote, you will have to promise them paradise and other things. And when you promise this, and if you are elected, then you have to fulfill your promises. For this reason, it is a slippery ground to promise things that you will not be able to do. But for a politician, it is such a temptation to get the vote of people with whom you may not agree. You may have a secular mind, but if you say that you are secular, you will become like Prime Minister Erdogan when he visited Cairo. He was met at the airport by the Muslim brothers. He was greeted like a hero. And when he said in a conference in the Cairo University that the best system is secular system, and he said that he was a pious Muslim, but he was the prime minister of a secular country. Secularism is something that has to be carried out by the state. Individuals do not need to be secular. It has to be left to individuals. It is something between themselves and their God. Whereas state should be secular. State should be equidistant to Christians, Muslims, Jews, atheists, Buddhists, and all of the other religions. This is what the ruling party in Turkey, and I am one of the founding members of the ruling party. I am one of the 72 founders of the party. This is what we were able to achieve. A party that came from the Islamic roots, transformed itself into a secular party. And the majority of the inner circle, hardcore of the party, are all pious Muslims, but the state is secular. So perhaps this may be one of the examples or one of the facts that may constitute a source of inspiration for Arab Spring countries, not for tomorrow, not for immediate future, but in the long run, because I understand that already in the constitutions of many Arab Spring countries, they are committed to make their country Islamic country also, or regard Sharia as the main source of their legislation. Now, when we turn to few comments regarding the Arab Spring countries, let's start with Tunisia. I think Tunisia completed as smoothly as it was possible the first phase of the transition. I say first phase because for us to know whether the Arab Spring started to take root or something similar to democracy started to take root in a given country, we have to see that the political parties that will come to power after the Arab Spring will have to be replaced by other parties. Before this happens, we cannot say that democracy has started to take root in these countries. So for this reason, we have to wait until 1 or 2 terms of elections to be able to say whether democracy is taking root in these countries. In Tunisia, the first phase of the transition went smoothly, and Mr. Ghannouchi promised, in order to perhaps dispel the worries or the concerns of the international community, that when they come to power, they will not impose Sharia, they will not force ladies to wear scarf, and they will not ban serving alcohol in the restaurants, because tourism is very important for the country. It is, I think, 25% of the national economy. So this was the promise made by Ennahda party in Tunisia, but later on, Salafis, which was not that important in Tunisia, started to make demonstrations, and the Ennahda party had to make concessions to them in order not to lose part of their grassroots, of their support to the Salafis. Salafis constitute a very a negligible minority, but as we say in our country, fly is a small insect, but when it falls into your soup, it spoils your soup. So it is not important whether they are small or not, but if they spoil the democracy soup in the country, then it's not good. But so far so good for Tunisia. As we come to Libya, I was nicely surprised to see that Mr. Jalil's party performed better than the others, and he obtained, I think, something like 39 seats. And the Muslim Brothers, which were supposed to have to be much stronger, had only 17 seats. But there are 120 individual seats. So this may cause, this may become a source of instability when there are so many individual parties, how to bring them together. I think the oil companies, international oil companies, may play a very important role on this stage of transition to democracy, because if they can play with the tribal chiefs and they can incite the tribal chiefs in order to change the composition of the government, then instability may also prevail in Libya. Another source of instability, potential source of instability, is the weapons that they were distributed in Libya, and we do not know in whose hand are all these weapons. And if the worst come to the worst, then these weapons will be used by everyone to settle their personal account with the others. And learning from this experience, now international community is more cautious to distribute weapons in Syria. I read in today's paper that Turkey provided Stinger missiles to the opposition in Syria. Most probably our authorities have more information than me, but I would be more in favor of not militarizing or not equipping neither side with weapons in Syria. The more there are weapons, the more the chaos will be more serious. In Egypt, I think everything that could be said about Egypt was already said, and the military are still playing a very important role, fortunately, because it is thanks to the role of the military that the transition was smooth. It may not be easy to uproot military from certain points, certain places, and I hope that they do not take Turkey's example. It is already 15 minutes. It may not be easy to uproot them from there, and I hope that they will not be inspired from Turkey's experience. In Turkey's experience, perhaps something negative, they may learn from Turkey's mistakes. In the mistake that Turkish military have committed in 1982, when they carried out a military coup, the military drafted a constitution, and as a temporary article in the constitution, they said that during the 2 years that the military governed the state, they cannot be taken to the court for any act they have committed during this period. So they shielded themselves. If the Egyptian military do the same, it will be a mistake. Why? Because 30 years later, when my party came to power, made an amendment in the constitution, submitted it to the referendum, and lifted this article, this temporary article from the constitution, so that the military could be taken to the court for what they have done 30 years ago. This is something that the Egyptian military may learn, and they cannot protect themselves for the mistakes that they have committed during their rule. This is an example. I will not dwell on Yemen and Bahrain because they are relatively less important. In Bahrain, of course, the international community used double standards. While they were supporting opposition in Libya and in Syria, they did not support opposition in Bahrain because Saudi Arabia came forward and they put down the rebellion. Syria is, of course, very important because when I was serving in Syria 30 years ago, we used to say that in the Middle East, no war can be made without Egypt, and no peace could be made without Syria. If you don't get the consent of Syria, you cannot make peace because of the central position of Syria. In Syria, things are going from bad to worse. And I hope that the international community will find a solution, will force the parties to arrive at a negotiated solution. Turkey, okay. I will use less than 5 minutes actually. Turkey is reticent to be pushed in Syria and to send his young man to be killed there for something which belongs to the Syrians to solve. The international community, if the international community agrees to create international legitimacy for a foreign intervention, then Turkey may consider becoming part of this coalition, something similar to what happened in Libya, that's to say, coalition of the willing, in order to facilitate the protection of the civilians. But Turkey wouldn't like to do it alone. That's to say, international community is refraining from sending their soldiers and from staining their hands with blood, but we wouldn't like to do this job as Turkey by ourselves. International legitimacy means Security Council decision. And the 2 permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations have already said loudly that they will not allow Bashar Assad to be brought down by force. So international legitimacy is not that easy to secure in Syria. And if Bashar Assad is brought down without substituting it with a workable mechanism, then the country will most probably fall into chaos. It is very difficult to avoid it. And when the chaos comes, the future is not that easy to determine. I always compare the fall of Bashar Assad, and this is where I differed from what the Turkish government is doing. Turkish government assumed that the Bashar Assad's fall was imminent, and it has done something that should not be done. Is normally in the diplomacy. In diplomacy, you never put all your eggs in the same basket. Turkey put all its eggs in the basket that presumes that Bashar Assad's fall was imminent, and they burned all the ships with Bashar Assad, and it lost the leverage, and it lost the role that it could play as an honest broker. I will stop here. I have half a minute, and I will use it next time I come to Toronto.
Thank you. And in the words of Monty Python, and now for something completely different. Akiva Eldar is the chief political columnist and editorial writer from Haaretz. He is where we actually had this sort of competition of folks about how long folks had taken to get here to be with us. You were 11 hours? 12 hours. So I'm not sure that that makes him the longest traveling person to get to be with us, but pretty close to it. So I'll ask you to the podium now.
Does it give me more time that I traveled 12 hours? Good evening, and thanks so much for having me here. Since you realize that Yasser has a sense of humor, I will start with a Turkish story that I hope he will take, since I think I told you the story, and his reaction was, I think, quite, I would say, he was reluctant to give me a piece of his mind. So I will tell you the story because it came to my mind when I was listening to Chief Sharon Stone Henry. In the 90s, I followed our foreign minister to a trip to Turkey, to a first meeting of Israeli politician, foreign minister, with Prime Minister Erbakan, who was the first leader of the party. And yeah, okay. And never mind, I was, no, this is not the punchline. The minister invited, we were 3 journalists, and I don't really know what crossed his mind, but he gave us a pin of the official delegation, and he offered us to join him to the official meeting with the Prime Minister, which was a great opportunity to watch his conduct. And I was sitting there, and he started, the Prime Minister started with lecturing the foreign minister about human rights and the occupation, and you know what you heard in apartheid, you've heard it before. And the foreign minister looks at us like saying, now watch it. And he said, how dare you lecture us after what you did to the Armenian? We were, I think, we wanted at that moment the earth to open its mouth and to swallow us. It was quite embarrassed, but I was thinking when I heard Chief Sharon Stinson Henry that if Bibi Netanyahu was here, he would tell you, who are you, Canadian, to tell us about discrimination, colonialism, occupation. You first take care of your own people. So if I was the devil's advocate, I don't mean that Bibi Netanyahu is the devil, but but I would start my presentation with saying, you know, Israel was responsible for the Black September in Jordan, where thousands of Palestinians were killed by the Hashemite kingdom, the massacre in Hama in Syria, in Sabra and Shatila, discrimination of Palestinians in Lebanon, and Israel is even responsible for the global warming. But I will not be the devil's advocate. I will not say all this. I will be analytical. And really, I'm not here to score points. If you read the Haaretz, you know that I'm not in this business to justify the Israeli occupation. And of course, I don't represent the Israeli government. But since there was nobody else here to do this, I paid my lip service. So let's go to the Arab Spring, and there are Israelis who think that we have nothing to do with it. Like Bibi Netanyahu, I know I heard it from Catherine Ashton, the so-called foreign minister of the EU. I was privileged to interview her last year, and she told me that she had this argument with Netanyahu, who said, this is not the time to make changes. There is a storm out there. Let's give, things to relax, and then we will see what we do. And her argument was No, Israel is not a bystander. Israel can and should influence. Israel is a player. It's not just watching. And if this is the time, this is the opportunity for you to move forward and to have your own input in where the Arab Spring goes. I will come back to this in my closing remarks. The Arab Spring took place in the midst of a race between the United States and Iran on hegemony in the Middle East. Iran was doing this using Hezbollah, Hamas, terrorism, both. It was the kind of the sushi coalition, Sunnis and Shiites. The Al-Qaeda and the global jihad and the Sunnis, which is a sushi combination. But I like sushi, so I don't have. The Iranians, and perhaps they have a good reason to believe that what the Americans are looking at is as a regime change, what they did in Iraq and oil, of course. Using the old system of divide and rule with the help of Israel, Mubarak, the two Abdallahs of Jordan and the Saudis, the pro-American forces in the Middle East, since they were not very popular, and one of the reasons that all those forces were not popular is the fact that they were perceived by the Arab world as the collaborators with Israel, since the Israeli flag is still hanging in Cairo and in Amman, and the Saudis, and I will come to this also later, have submitted the Arab Peace Initiative. They started with the Arab Peace Initiative. It was very easy for the Iranian to start the incitement and to portray them as the pro-American, pro-Israeli, anti-Palestinian, anti-Arabs, anti-Muslim forces. The Russians, at the beginning, they were not focused enough, so they missed the Arab Spring at the beginning, and before they knew it, NATO took over Libya. But I think that now they got their acts together, and Putin realized that there is an opportunity here to play with the big guys, kind of a repetition of the Cold War, siding with Syria and with Iran, and proving that Syria has a say in this big game of the Middle East, like they did before Sadat went to Jerusalem and sent the Russian experts back home. Now, a little bit of history, very quick, in order to go to what are the options for the future, which is, I think, the most interesting thing. I will start with 91, after the Gulf War, which was, in a way, it was perceived, at least, as a success of the American strategy. President Bush Sr. and James Baker have decided to form the X of peace, okay, rather than the X of evil. They have managed to bring the most radical Israeli prime minister, until Netanyahu, of course, Yitzhak Shamir. I think Netanyahu is going to break the record. And they managed to bring him together with all the Arab leaders, including Syria, Lebanon, the Saudis, representatives from the Gulf, you name it, they were all. And Shamir, I can briefly tell you a funny story that Shamir was putting his bets on Assad, Hafez al-Assad, that he will never agree to sit down with Israel in the same room. So since he didn't want to negotiate with the Palestinian, he said to Bush and to Baker, I will be willing to sit with the Palestinian, but you need to bring everyone on board. I want to see all the Arabs. Why? It's not enough. I want to negotiate peace. Since I'm such a peacenik, I want to see everyone on board. And of course, we, the political analysts, we, including myself, I admit, we predicted that it will never happen, of course, and that he's a genius, Shamir. Because it sounds very legitimate to ask to see all the Arabs and to reach out for regional peace, and that the Syrians will not come, so he's off the hook. But one day I got a call from an American congressman who visited Damascus, met with Assad. He came to Jerusalem, and he told me that Assad, he just a few hours before that, Assad told him that he decided to accept the invitation. So, of course, it was headlines in my newspaper the next morning, was quoted everywhere. And I was eager to hear as a journalist, you want to hear the follow-up on Israeli radio. I turned on the radio at 7 o'clock in the morning, and guess what? The spokesman of the Israeli Prime Minister denies my story. Of course, I called him, congratulated him for his new job as the spokesman of Assad, and he apologized because he was a very nice person, and he still is. And he said, it never happened to me. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the Prime Minister woke me up, and he said, kill this story. So I had to do this, and I felt I was very embarrassed. A few days later, I interviewed the Prime Minister, and I started with, Mr. Shamir, I must admit that you're right. You can't trust the Arabs. So the Syrians and all the others, they participated in this Madrid conference in '91, and it was not just about peace. The Americans have started 5 subcommittees, and I'm sure that most of you don't even remember that this happened. There were 5 subcommittees. One of them was headed actually by Canada. They called us gavel holders, the refugee subcommittee. The others were economic cooperation, water, arms control, and even environment. The idea was to try and inject some money, a kind of a Marshall Plan in the Middle East, and to change the Middle East. Of course, this is not what Shamir had in mind. He insisted to keep building settlements. It came down to a showdown with the American administration. Shamir lost the elections. Yitzhak Rabin became prime minister. Bush lost the elections. Some people say that it has to do with the Jewish vote, with what Ali mentioned, AIPAC, my favorite organization. And as you know, Rabin was assassinated, but to be fair to history, Arafat contributed, and I think it was also mentioned before, when he didn't realize what the terrorist attacks are doing. We didn't realize, people in the Israeli peace camp, what the settlements are doing. If you like, you can read it in my book, The Lords of the Land. It's available on Amazon. So Rabin was assassinated and Netanyahu was elected prime minister. He admitted that he will do everything to undermine the peace process, the Oslo Agreement. He doesn't believe in territories for peace, and he did very well. Then Barak took over, Prime Minister Barak, who broke the record of the shortest term as prime minister, less than 2 years. But before that, he succeeded to destroy the peace process completely by dragging Arafat to Camp David and Clinton when we were still very far away, and to a summit that was doomed to fail. Now, I will go straight to Obama, who made the other mistake, wasted 4 years chasing the settlements instead of putting his foot down and putting, what I mean is to putting an American blueprint on the table, which was ready. It was done by Bill Clinton at the end of in December 2000. It's there. It will always be there. There is no other solution but go back to the 67 borders with an agreed upon swap, with dividing Jerusalem between the Palestinian neighborhoods and the Jewish neighborhoods. And I see that Ali is leaving because I am a two-stater and he's one-stater. No, I know, I'm kidding. I believe in a two-state solution, and because I am a Zionist, and I look at what's happening in Syria and in Iraq and what happened in Bosnia, and I believe that before we get married, we need a good rabbi or a good priest to divorce, because there is so much. We're so loaded with animosity and history that I believe in coexistence. My granddaughters go to an Arab-Israeli school. They have 2 teachers, an Arab and a Palestinian and a Jew, and I'm very happy with it. And I believe that this can work in the future, but there are only 4 very small schools like this in Israel. Now, the Arab Spring has created, at the same time that there are risks and uncertainty, and nobody likes to live in uncertainty, especially a small country like Israel, which is the paradox in Israel that we are bragging that we have the strongest army, but at the same time we are the victims. But we live with this paradox, and people believe that you are strong, but you are the victim. Nothing much we can do about it. Like there was a survey that shows that the majority of the Israelis support the views of the left, but they vote right. But I don't have the time to go into explaining why this is, but this is part of the political psychology of Israel, and I can go on talking about this. But what really worries us these days is, of course, and I'm sure that many of you want to ask me about it, so I will answer it. What's going to happen with the Iranian nuclear program, with the nuke? I believe that Bibi is bluffing. He's a very good poker player, and maybe in his own way, he's doing well, because since everybody is afraid of these loose cannons, he and Barak, those wild kids, they are doing everything to impose more sanctions on Iran. And maybe if he hasn't done this, if he hasn't sent a clear message that hold me tight because otherwise I will attack, maybe we won't see those the international community upgrading the sanctions against Iran. But Netanyahu keeps saying, and Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, that all the options are on the table. Are they really? When they speak about all the options, it's 2 options: to attack Iran or not to attack Iran. Actually, whether Israel will do it or the United States. Are there any other options? I believe there are. For instance, nobody has mentioned, or correct me if I'm wrong, in the last 2.5 days, the Arab Peace Initiative, which was launched in March 28, 2002 in Beirut, is offering Israel not only full peace, but normal relations, normalization, which means open borders, a just and agreed upon solution to the refugee problem based on Resolution 194. There is a debate whether 194 is about the right of return or not. But since it says it has to be an agreed upon, Israel cannot decide not to agree. But we don't have the time to go into these nuances. And it's not nuances, it's actually, for Palestinians, it's very important. But we have an opportunity here to put on the table a package deal that will include the Arab Peace Initiative, ending the occupation, and Middle East free of weapons of mass destruction. And this will also allow Iran to get off the tree. Because for Iran, it's very clear that once they will agree and will make a statement that to the IAEA, inviting the inspectors and say, we put an end to our nuclear program, Israel, Netanyahu will declare victory. Can the Iranians afford it? Politically, no. And they should not. Because, of course, Netanyahu will declare victory. For him, actually, I should add, he's already winning because he has already completely distracted the public opinion, the agenda from the Israeli-Palestinian issue. When was the last time you read something about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, about the settlements, about the peace process, the Annapolis process? Even when, I know from our diplomatic correspondent, when he offers the editor a story about this, he said, leave me alone, who cares now? Give me a story about Iran. I want to hear more about that. When are we going to attack? So by putting this on the table, we can, in conflict resolution, I think in first year course of conflict resolution, what you learn is that instead of cutting the cake, expand it. So we can put more ingredients into this cake, allow the Iranians, and who cares, to take credit for ending the occupation, and you can form the same kind of coalition that President Bush Sr. had in mind in '91, of a kind of pragmatic coalition using the Arab Spring, since now things are coming, this can be a real peace that comes bottom up and not top down, and this is real peace. Otherwise, I was in Tahrir Square in May last year, and I met with some young people that I was told that I was crazy to admit that I'm Israeli, to identify as Israeli, but they said, listen, if there will be a third intifada, when we will see Israeli soldiers killing Palestinian kids, it's going to be a regional intifada. Okay, it will be, you can kiss goodbye the peace agreement with Egypt and with Jordan, because now it's not Mubarak anymore that you can do any kind of deals under the table. Now everything is on the table, everything is in the street. The Arab street has a say also, not only on domestic issues as food and education and healthcare, but also on foreign relations. We have a say. So you watch it. So to wrap it up, I believe that the Arab Peace Initiative, the fact that the international community and the Israeli community is completely ignoring the Arab Peace Initiative is a crime. And this should be corrected, and it can be corrected if the United States and Canada and the EU will tell the Israeli government it's either one-state solution or two-state solution. It's like Ehud Barak said already in 1999, Ehud Barak, our minister of the defense minister, he said, if we keep the territories under occupation, we will eventually have to decide whether the Palestinians will be able to vote, which will be the end of the Jewish state, or we don't allow them to vote, which is the end of the Israeli democracy. There is no such a thing as a one-and-a-half-state solution. And actually, this is the situation right now. One-and-a-half-state solution. It's Israel and the PA, which is the Palestinian Authority, which is a subcontractor of the Israeli occupation. And this cannot last forever. And actually, you taxpayers are paying for it, instead of me paying for it, until Oslo. And I don't know if you know, 60% of the occupied territories of the West Bank is off limits for the Palestinians. It's Area C that was invented in Oslo. Oslo, you know, Netanyahu is threatening that he will cancel Oslo. If I was a Palestinian, I would say, Come on, do this. Let's see. But I hope that after the American elections, and you know what? I am not sure if Mitt Romney will not be as tough as President Bush Sr. was on settlements. I have seen so many American presidents swearing that the first thing that they will do if they win the elections is moving the embassy to Jerusalem. And guess what? Where is the embassy? It's not even in West Jerusalem, which is not occupied according to the Americans. So I'm very proud to be part of an Israeli, small but very prominent and quality people group that started the Israeli Peace Initiative. You can look up our website, israelipeaceinitiative.com. We presented it to the Arab League. We were invited to Cairo, to the Secretary General of the Arab League, Nabil al-Arabi. We presented it to Abu Mazen, the Palestinian president. We presented it to the American administration, to the European, and guess who refused to see us? Our Prime Minister. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The next person I'm going to ask to the podium to talk to us is Nimir Satani. He's a human rights lawyer and a Palestinian academic. We were having a quick chat on the way over, where weather was kind of the topic as we were coming over. He explained that he his home is in Israel, which is fairly temperate. His first academic posting in North America was in Virginia, which it's all right, it's a little colder, then to Boston, where he has been a scholar for many years, but starting, I guess, this fall, his new academic posting will be in Buffalo. So the poor man is moving from warm to rather chilly climactically, even if the topic tonight is warm. So anyway.
Good evening. So we have been discussing in the previous sessions democratization processes and struggles in different parts of the Arab world that are met with varying degrees of success. I would like to focus on the other side of the coin, on the counter-democratization processes in Israel, Palestine, and how they are likely to be affecting the prospects of a peace process. Now, obviously, the Arab Spring had at least two major effects. One, it exposes the non-democratic regimes that are left behind and that might be under external and internal pressure to democratize. And I'll be focusing on the PA, the Palestinian Authority, and Israel, as an example of these non-democratic regimes. And secondly, it further escalates the process of decline of US-Israeli domination in the region. Now, this has been in process for several years before the Arab Spring, given several reasons, such as the rise of Turkey as a regional power that is increasingly critical of the Israeli policies with its booming economy and somewhat independent of US decision-making in the region. Secondly, the colossal failure of the American occupation of Iraq and the devastating effects of that occupation and the rise of Iran's role in Iraq. Thirdly, the rise of armed non-state actors such as Hezbollah that can withstand a long war with a conventional army, as we saw in 2006, without being destroyed. And fourthly, and this will be the point that was mentioned in Akiva's speech in the end, is Egypt. And this is the main factor, I think. If Egypt will behave as a sovereign state that is no longer a US puppet and no longer a staunch ally of the Israelis and no longer a staunch ally of the current Palestinian leadership of the PA, then we will see some change in the region, I believe. Because the ruling elites in Egypt today are more pro-Palestinian than the previous ruling elites. And the public opinion in Egypt is even more pro-Palestinian than the ruling elites. And I think this is the most fascinating and exciting development in the region, the emergence of Arab public opinion. It was marginalized, it was repressed, and now it might play a role. And this role will be reacting to Israeli actions and demanding the Egyptian government to do something about it. Now, the difference in Egyptian policies, I think, and the inclusion of Arab public opinion balances the picture. Because so far in the West, we have seen that Western governments nodded in understanding when Israeli governments had coalition issues and had to care about elections periodically. But now they have to care also about the demands of the Arab street, because these might be reflected on the decision-making processes of the Egyptian government. Now, Patrick Martin said in the morning that if he were to advise the Israelis, he would say that they should run and cut a deal right now. I think the worst thing that can happen right now is if there is a deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And unlike Akiva, I think that for a peace deal, a fair peace deal, a just peace deal to materialize in the region, the process of decline of U.S.-Israeli domination should be complete. At least should be more advanced than now. So my argument is this. First, if you support peace and democracy, first, you should not support the PA. Second, you should not support Israel. Third, you should not support the peace process. The peace process, by which I mean the Oslo process, does not lead to peace and will not lead to peace, and is neither contributing to Israel or the PA becoming more democratic. In fact, the existing policies of Western countries like Canada, the US, and the EU are impeding peacemaking in the region by insisting on a failed process, and are impeding the emergence of democracy in Israel and Palestinian Authority in the same way they impeded democracy in Tunisia, Egypt, and other places by supporting non-democratic actors and non-democratic processes. And even if a deal was signed today between the Israelis and the Palestinians, I think this deal will not last for long, given the lack of credibility, given the grave asymmetry of power between the parties, and given the non-democratic nature of both. So let me start with the PA. The US, Canada, and the EU are supporting a large security apparatus in the PA, and they are funding it and they are training it. And if you want to know the modus operandi of this security apparatus, you need only to read some of the reports of the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, for example, in which you can see that a police state is under making. It's the same, such as, for example, torture and degrading treatment, violations of free speech rights, of peaceful assembly, of freedom of association, etc. This is the kind of police state that Tunisians revolted against. Corruption is also rampant in the PA, and this is, again, similar to the corruption that we saw in the Tunisian case. And even procedurally, the PA is not democratically legitimate, even within the framework of Oslo. All the institutions are non-representative. The president office expired in January 2009. The elections for the Legislative Council has not been scheduled since January 2006, and in which Hamas won. The term of elected officials in local councils has expired in January 2009. Finally, the Palestinian National Council is an antiquated and marginalized body, and the executive committee of the PLO does not include many organizations, Palestinian organizations such as Hamas. Canada, the US, and the EU are reproducing the same old paradigm that we saw in the Arab world, which is support secular dictators in order to prevent the possibility that a democratic process will bring the Islamists to power. So they refuse to engage with Hamas. For example, a European official told The Economist in April 2010, I quote, "The last thing many in Europe want is for Hamas to regain an executive role in the West Bank. We prefer division and no elections to reconciliation and elections," end of quote. But now the Western powers are talking to the Islamists in Egypt. Will they talk to the Islamists in Palestine, i.e. Hamas? The Arab Spring proved that the stability of dictatorships is illusory. Will the Palestinians overthrow the PA, especially now when Mubarak and other allies are not available anymore? The PA leaders failed to achieve anything substantial, given the fact that the only strategy they have is negotiations, and negotiations led to a blocked end. Except, of course, the other stuff they had is some occasional PR campaigns, such as the application for statehood and membership in the UN, which was, according to me, a complete farce. And there is a growing demand now amongst Palestinians for electing the Palestinian National Council and reviving the PLA and the other representative institutions. The only reason why the PA is still in power is because of the security apparatus and the dependency of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians on the salaries provided by the PA, which are paid by the EU and others with strings attached politically. Let me move now quickly to Israel. According to the website of the Canadian Foreign Affairs and International Trade Office, I quote, "Canada and Israel enjoy a steadfast friendship and strong growing bilateral relations in many areas based on shared values, including democracy." Let us reflect for a moment on this statement. Democracy would presumably include formal equality, protection of minority rights, and separation of religion from the state. What does Israel and Canada exactly share? Section 15 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms promises equal protection of the laws to all citizens, regardless of who they are. In Israel, the Knesset rejected repeatedly the attempt by Arab lawmakers to introduce the same principle of equality before the law in the Israeli Book of Laws. For example, on January 23rd, 2002, Tzipi Livni, a centrist, so-called centrist, notice that I'm not choosing Lieberman, I'm not choosing Netanyahu, I'm not choosing Sharon, I'm choosing someone who is supposedly a centrist and a peacemaker in Israel. She urged members of the Knesset on that occasion to reject this equal protection of the laws, and indeed the overwhelming majority at that day and in other occasions later on rejected this attempt by Arab lawmakers. And formal equality remains outside the Israeli Book of Laws. In fact, discrimination against the Palestinians inside Israel is systematic and institutional and institutionalized at all levels. At the constitutional level, the state defines itself as a Jewish state and precludes any attempt to change the character of the state, even by political democratic means. At the legal level, Israel's declared state of emergency lasted longer than Egypt's declared state of emergency. Egypt declared a state of emergency in 1958, and it expired, or it annulled it after the uprising in Egypt. Israel has been under a state of emergency since its inception. Apparently, non-democratic countries use the same tools. While the apartheid court in South Africa decided in the famous case of Komani Nover's Bantu administration in 1982 to protect the right to family life and struck down the governmental regulations to prevent black couples from living in urban white areas. And while the US Supreme Court in 1967 in Loving versus Virginia struck down anti-miscegenation laws, the Israeli Supreme Court twice, in 2006 and 2012, upheld the legality of the ban on family unification. According to this law, Palestinians, and only them, Palestinian citizens, and only them, cannot naturalize their spouses if these spouses were residents of the Palestinian occupied territories or one of the adjacent Arab countries. So according to this law, for example, I can't marry half of the Middle East. A recent law legalizes the segregation in housing by legalizing the role of admission committees that can screen out candidates for social incompatibility. So while many countries, settler colonial countries like Australia in the Mabo cases in the 90s, and Canada in the Delgamaco case, are revisiting their history of treatment of indigenous populations, and specifically with the question of land. So the Delgamaco case, for example, recognized oral history as an evidence for title over land. And the Mabo case inaugurated a whole literature in law, which was called the jurisprudence of regret. The Israeli legislative and judicial branches have been on the other track, and an extensive system was put in place to confiscate more than 80% of the lands of the private property of the Palestinian citizens of Israel. At the time, our population grew from 156,000 to 1.4 million. We had 80% lands less. So this means that you have more population and less territory, poor, overcrowded communities. More than 600 communities, Jewish communities, were established since 1948, 0 new Arab communities. Now, the housing segregation goes hand in hand with the segregation in education. The government in Israel runs two segregated systems, one for Arabs and one for Jews. And the Arab education system, needless to say, is inferior in all aspects to the Jewish education system. Now, this segregation education is aided not only by the fact there is segregation in housing, but also by the decentralized character of Israeli local government law. Israeli universities contribute to this process by, for example, by lowering the number of Arab candidates and Arab students in universities. For example, in 2003, they changed the admission policies exactly for that reason. It was actively and openly stated as such. And later on, in recent years, they introduced more restrictions on admissions to medical schools for the same reason. Now, planning authorities have maintained, Planning authorities have maintained aggregation even in the so-called mixed cities. Sometimes people think that separation walls exist only in the occupied territories, but I have news for you. You can see them also in Israel between Jewish communities and, or even Jewish neighborhoods and Arab neighborhoods in the same city. For example, Lid, Ramli, and between the wealthy Jewish city of Caesarea and the poor Arab town of Jisr Zarqa. The planning authorities also further impeded the industrialization of Arab communities by using the pretext of environmentalism and tourism, and therefore there are less employment opportunities inside these communities, and this affects employment for everyone, but specifically for Arab women. The rate of Arab women employment inside Israel is less than Saudi Arabia and Oman. Now, discriminatory distribution of welfare payments also contributes to the production of poverty. In 2008, for example, the welfare payments by the state reduced poverty amongst Jewish citizens by 46% compared to 13% amongst the Palestinians, 46% amongst the Jews compared to 13% amongst the Palestinians. So no surprise that 65.8% of the Palestinian children inside Israel are under the poverty line in 2010, compared with 24% of the Jewish children. Under these conditions, also, it's not surprising that there is high levels of crime and organized crime. Although the Palestinians inside Israel are 18% of the population, they are 50% of the criminal prisoners, 67% of the murder suspects, and 70% of the attempted murder suspects. To conclude, the state produced concentrated poverty in racially segregated areas and prevented social and spatial mobility. This leads to transforming Arab communities into areas of high crime, poor schools, high mortality rates, and welfare-dependent residents. In other words, it becomes a ghetto. This is what I call the process of Godaization of the Palestinian citizen. Now, I don't have time, but there is a parallel process that happens also in the Palestinian occupied territories, which scholars call the Bantustanization of the occupied territories, which is non-contiguous areas segregated from the Jewish community, economically dependent, and overcrowded. So, to conclude, both inside Israel's Green Line and in the occupied territories, there is an apartheid system. Palestinians are relegated in both areas to a separate and unequal status. Under these conditions, the question is, what should be done? If the current framework is not leading to peace and is not leading to establishing a Palestinian state, then this process is a sham. Instead of a peace process, it's actually a colonization process in which there are more settlers and there are less viable economic institutions and political institutions to build a state. The logic of Oslo was negotiations before freedom. And it led to an interesting ambiguous situation in which the Palestinians are neither in a liberation struggle nor in a state-building phase. They are bearing the responsibility of freedom without actually enjoying freedom. The world looks at them as if they were in a post-colonial stage while the colonizers are still around, land grabbing and building more settlements and bringing more settlers. Without changing these the power structures in place, by which I mean the US-Israeli domination in the region, this process, the peace process, the Oslo process, will not lead to peace. And if Israel is an apartheid regime, then external pressure is needed in order to oblige Israel to yield to the demands of the international community and grant equal rights to all those who are under its control. And let us hope that this will be the legacy of the Arab Spring. Thank you.
Thank you, Nimir. The final member of our panel for this evening is Paul Heinbecker. He's Canadian, distinguished Canadian, with a long history of service to the country. And I will ask Paul to come to the podium.
Andy, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, I'm acutely aware that I am the last person between you and a drink, and for some people, perhaps the last person between you and dinner. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but this is going to take a while. But I don't need the 5-minute sign. I have my BlackBerry. I still believe in BlackBerry. And if you have a BlackBerry and it rings, that's fine with me. And we can tell the difference between BlackBerry rings and the others. Martha, thank you very much, wherever Martha is. Uh-oh, there you are. Thank you very much for including me in this discussion, I think. Rima, thank you very much for telling me what tack I should take with this highly informed and very engaged audience. I sure hope you were right. you know, I'm in the group that's supposed to talk about regional dynamics, but last I noticed Ottawa was a long way from a very long way from that region. So if I'm not from that region, I guess what's meant for me to do is to try to answer the question that was posed on Canadian foreign policy. So that's what I'm going to try to do. And besides, it gives me one more opportunity to give the Canadian government some advice, whether it wants to receive it or not. And I'm happy to do that. And I want to apologize to Ferry de Kerkhoff, who's probably going to say the same thing tomorrow morning. But it's, you know, age before beauty, Ferry. So I'm going to argue today, without much nuance, because there's not much time for nuance, that Canada should follow a principled, coherent, consistent, and committed strategy to the region. I won't go into the context of you know, we've been talking about context for a couple of days. It's been extremely interesting. It filled in a lot of gaps. But we're almost at the point in the proceedings that we used to get to in the United Nations, which is that everything has been said. It just hasn't been said yet by everybody. So I'm going to give you my frankly optimistic judgment. I won't go through the context. I think history is unfolding favorably the way it should. I'm also conscious, of course, what Zhou Enlai is reported to have said to Henry Kissinger, that it was too soon to tell about the French Revolution. But I'd like to pick up on what Rami Khoury said, and that is basically, you know, the West should chill out. You know, autocracy gives you the straight roads to places. Democracy gives you curves, gives you switchbacks, gives you zigzags, gives you detours, and gives you sometimes dead ends. So we need to remind ourselves, we in the West, that our own liberal democracies have been in the making since the Magna Carta in 1215. Canadian democracy has been unfolding for a very long time, and we're still proroguing Parliament sometimes. So we need to cut the Arabs some slack, and we need to take heart from the fact that progress is actually being made. There's a kind of school of thought in international relations that progress is never made, that everything is terrible, everything's going backwards. But it really isn't true. You know, the world has never been richer, the world has never been healthier, most of the world has never been safer, there have never been fewer interstate wars, people have never been better connected. You know, we're living in a golden age, and to this golden age is now being added the Arab awakening. I don't know whether you call it the awakening or the revolution or the rebellion or the spring or the fall or whatever it is. But we're seeing the Arabs and start to enjoy, or have at least the hope of enjoying, the same kinds of freedoms that we enjoy. And we should also remember, and there's, you know, that not all Muslims are the same. In our society here, there's a great deal of anxiety. Every time you open a newspaper, you see stories that are, you know, to give you a measure of the anxiety, and it's not in Canada, thank God, but, you know, what we saw in Wisconsin the other day, where a Sikh temple is attacked because some crazy can't tell the difference between Muslims and other people. And Islam covers a considerable spectrum of belief from the observant, merely observant, to the fanatical. And it ought to go without saying that if we're worried about that, we also ought to be worrying about Christianism and its extremes. Because at their extremes, neither Islam nor Christianity nor Judaism, none of the monotheistic faiths is particularly generous to the other. Nor should we long for the stability of the pre-awakening days. For 60 years, we thought we were working for stability, but what we were really doing was imposing stagnation. That stagnation fed the Arab autocracies, it impoverished ordinary Arabs, it retarded their democracy, it produced societies susceptible to the appeals of religious extremism, and it left the socially disenfranchised with little hope and less dignity. And in any case, we have to remind ourselves that we don't control this process. This is not our process. The Arab awakening belongs to the Arab peoples. We can help, but we can't direct. And meddling in things that we don't understand, and I would respectfully say that includes a lot of American policy, meddling in things that they don't understand is more likely to do harm than good. So let's take heart from what we're seeing, but let's be modest in what our expectations of what we can do about it are, but let's try to, our posture should be one of helping them help themselves. So with that kind of, with those caveats, what can Canada do and what should Canada do? First, we need to get on the right side of history. We need to engage with our Arab friends rather than sit nervously on the sidelines and worry about what might be coming. This is the time of great need, and we will be remembered either for what we did to help or the fact that we didn't do anything to help. We only have modest influence, but we are capable of helping. We, Canada, are capable of helping. Change was coming to the Middle East at some time. It has come now. Now the smart thing for us to do is to embrace it and not to look at like a gift horse in the mouth. Embrace it carefully. I take seriously all of the warnings in some sense that we've heard in the course of this conference. You know, there's no profit in being naive, but hundreds of millions of Arabs are ridding themselves of the indignities of autocracy, kleptocracy, repression, privilege, and corruption. That's something for us to celebrate, and it's something that we should help with when we reasonably can. And we shouldn't be ignoring the security risks of the threats the Israelis feel. We should take that seriously. But that's not the only prism, and that's not the main prism that we should be looking at the Arab awakening in. The Arab awakening is about the Arabs and about changing times for the Arabs. Second, as everything is connected to everything else in the Middle East, the Harper government should develop a coherent policy. What time is my good time? A coherent policy towards the countries of the Middle East. One that resets Canada's relations with those countries. And such a policy begins with recognizing how important this region is to Canada, how important it is to the 500,000 plus Canadians of Arab descent, the many thousands of Canadians more whose livelihoods depend on relations with those countries, and to all the Canadians whose security is affected by what happens there. One of the things that we're not so clear about in our minds, but we probably should be, is just the size of that economic relationship. There is more merchandise trade between Canada and the Gulf Cooperation Council countries than there is between Canada and India. And we're making a big deal of getting a trade relationship with India. So let's put this in perspective. This is not something to do because we're being grateful and generous. This is something that we can do because it's in our own interest. And because Canadians' security is affected. And moreover, it's because Canadians are not indifferent to the suffering that they're seeing on their television screens and their computer screens. The Canadians are not, Canadian values don't easily accept the kind of brutality that we're seeing. So Ottawa should frame an effective strategy towards the region, one that incorporates all the foreign policy instruments, starting with diplomacy, but also military, trade and investment, civil society, and aid. We need to build relations with North Africa and the Middle East for the long term. This is not transactional stuff. This is not go in and get an agreement and come back out again. This is forming a relationship and staying and sticking with it. No light switch diplomacy. Light switch diplomacy is a term that George Shultz invented, the former U.S. Secretary of State, to describe what happens at every time you change the Secretary of State in the United States, you change their foreign policy. We've had that in Canada too. And that doesn't make a lot of sense, especially for a country like Canada, which isn't big enough to be able to withstand these kind of discontinuities. And we shouldn't let the opportunities that we see in Asia, and there are great opportunities in Asia, but we shouldn't let them blind us to the opportunities in the Middle East and to what's happening there. We need to revisit CETA's policy of concentration. It kind of includes North Africa and the Middle East, but it doesn't include any single country in North Africa and the Middle East. And beyond humanitarian aid, we should put greater emphasis on encouraging the Canadian business community. The Canadian business community can be transformative. That's where the jobs are going to come from. The investment by Canadian companies like Lavalin, for example, or Bombardier, and many others, and banks. They can promote trade, and that will build the jobs that will bring the income and the hope and the dignity to young Arab people that don't have it now. We should also support, and this I understand is controversial in this audience, although I'm a bit surprised by that, but I guess it's possible. We should also support efforts to develop democratic institutions. We have experience in integrating minorities. We have experience in reconciling group rights and individual rights. We have faced these questions in Canada, and we've come up with answers, and the answers that we've come up with might not be perfect answers for the Arab countries, but but we should make that offer. That should be on offer. That's something that I think we can do. An enhanced strategy in this respect would support political pluralism and build capacity. For example, we could coach jurists in due process. Canadians could train prosecutors and police on sort of the latest in norms, modern evidentiary norms, so that evidence gathering precedes charges against the accused rather than the other way around. We should support human rights, especially women's rights, and we should invest in girls' education. And we should invest in university exchanges to a much greater extent than we have so far. And a coherent Canadian policy towards the Middle East will have a military component. Ultimately, the responsibility to protect, which is a more or less made in Canadian idea, is meaningless unless somebody is willing to intervene to protect people. And that's as we did in Kosovo, as we have in Libya. In my judgment, the Canadian government acquitted itself well in Libya, and in doing so reinforced the responsibility to protect. For all the debate and all the talk about NATO sort of exceeding its mandate, failure to remove Gaddafi would have been a worse outcome if that had been allowed to happen. Personally, I would be very comfortable in the UN Security Council in defending what NATO has done in Libya. UN security, people forget. UN Security Council Resolution 1973 authorized member states, and I quote, to take all necessary measures to protect civilians in civilian-populated areas under threat of attack in the Libyan Arab Republic. It also authorized member states, quote, to take all necessary measures, unquote, to impose a no-fly zone. All necessary measures is a term of art in the UN Security Council and in the UN. It means all necessary measures. And the people who decide whether it's necessary or not are the people who are doing it. So when you hear the Russians and the Chinese and others saying, my God, they had no idea that there would be military action, and but we thought this was going to be about peacekeeping, that's baloney. That's feigned indignation. That's the Russians covering their immoral policies in Syria with a cloak of principle. They knew what this meant as much in Libya as they did as anybody else did. The moment is fast approaching in Syria when a decision is going to have to be made about military intervention. According to the responsibility to protect, where a population is suffering serious harm, a large-scale loss of life, as a result of internal war, insurgency, repression, or state failure, and the state in question, and I'm quoting, is unable or unwilling to halt or avert the serious harm, or is itself perpetrating it, an international responsibility to protect civilians is created. Clearly, with tens of thousands of people killed already and hundreds of thousands displaced, Syria meets these tests. But there's more to the responsibility to protect. There are also the precautionary principles. According to the precautionary principles, intervention is justified when it is done primarily, not necessarily exclusively, with the right motivation. And it's justified when there is a reasonable chance of halting the suffering and of doing more good than harm. It is not yet clear that that last test can be met. Syria notoriously presents a much more complex military challenge than Libya did. The Assad regime has considerable, though not invincible, military capacity. It has rhetorical and some material support from the Russians and the Iranians. And the US, who are indispensable to an intervention of this kind, are in the process of ending 2 other wars and can hardly be expected to want to start a third, and they're deeply engulfed in an election campaign. The European powers are transfixed by the self-destruction of the Eurozone. Turkey, as you've heard, is unwilling to be the spearhead itself of an act in Syria, of an action in Syria, not least because it does not want to not least because it's not confident that the rest of NATO will be at its side rather than at its back, and also because it doesn't want to inadvertently create a situation in which the Kurdish problem is worsened for Turkey and for everybody else. Now, I haven't had the 5-minute call yet, so I did? Okay, what one are we at now? About 2.5? Okay, I'll go fast. The Security Council is blocked by a Russian veto, but military action is not blocked by a Russian veto. When the Kosovo War was about to take place, I had lunch at the invitation of the Russian ambassador in Ottawa. His name was Vitaly Churkin, and he's now the Russian ambassador in New York. And I told him then, and it's true now, Russia has a veto over action, the blessing of military action by the UN Security Council. It does not have a veto over military action itself. In Kosovo, NATO acted without a UN mandate, and in my judgment, it acted legitimately, if not legally. When we were I was in charge of the Kosovo task force in Ottawa. We went to the UN several times. I was told by the Singaporean ambassador that if we'd held a vote in the UN General Assembly, 150 countries would have been in favor of military action on Kosovo. I was told by one of the Arab ambassadors that they could have guaranteed us 57 Arab votes. It does depend on what the international community thinks. And in this regard, I'll point out to you the recent UN General Assembly resolution, which was passed 133 in favor to 12 against. And the 12 against included Myanmar, Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, China, Belarus, and so on. These are not the kind of people, that we need to be following necessarily. In my judgment, the drop-dead date, and I'm sorry for that term, for a decision to stop the killing is very close. Either action is taken very soon or it becomes impossible. And the killing will go on, and more people will die. A quick comment on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, and I'll buy anybody a drink who wants one if they'll just, if they'll just wait till I finish this part. Canadian policy on this issue needs to be built on the principles of universal salience, principles that Canadians believe in, principles that we apply consistently, whatever the circumstance, without double standards. On the future of Palestine, in my judgment, we should anchor our positions in international law, including international humanitarian law. At times, our doing so would not be welcomed by either party to the conflict and not by their respective supporters in Canada. But nevertheless, the law is the rock on which we can stand in the turbulent politics of the Middle East. Basing our judgments on the law would also be the surest way to remain principled and just in practice as well as in rhetoric, and to reintroduce the concept of fairness to Canadian policy. At the same time, we should remind ourselves that innocent people on both sides are being killed and are bearing the brunt of this conflict. And we should infuse our decisions with basic human compassion and empathy. At the UN in September, Canada renewed its commitment to the founding principles of the United Nations, including specifically the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, the maintenance of international law, and the fulfillment of the obligations inherent in the Charter. If the Government of Canada wants to be respected for a principled policy, it will have to apply those principles in all aspects of its foreign policy. And it will have to make its decisions and let the chips fall where they may. This means neither supporting Israel nor the Palestinians, neither taking the view that they're, neither supporting them right or wrong, nor presuming that either party can do no wrong. We should be fair-minded and clear-spoken on human rights violations by both sides. This means giving neither democratic governments nor sentimental underdogs a general dispensation from scrutiny. History is replete with examples of resistance movements and democracies violating human rights laws and norms. I remind you that the excesses of Guantanamo, Abu Ghraib, and Bagram, to say nothing of the rendition of Canadians to be tortured in Syria, were perpetrated by the self-proclaimed world's greatest democracy. In the Middle East, on Canadian foreign policy and our relationship with Israel, loyalty to a friend, even a democratic friend, may be a policy, but it's not a principle. Thank you.